Is Dick Turpin here? Is Dick Turpin in these woods? Show yourself!
3.5 years ago, we trod the old haunting ground of the notorious highwayman Dick Turpin.
Now we're back on his trail, visiting key locations in Dick Turpin's legendary life of crime.
From the forest he terrorized as a highwayman to the historic city where he met his ignominious end.
Beautiful, beautiful. You don't get this in the States.
Dick Turpin was born in 1705. The son of a butcher and innkeeper, he was taught to read and write, and probably apprenticed as a butcher in the village of Whitechapel, which would later become the notorious slum and hunting ground for the world's first serial killer, Jack the Ripper. Back in the 18th century, by the time he was 20, Dick Turpin had opened his own butcher shop in the town of Buckhurst Hill in Epping Forest in the county of Essex.
At that time, the area was plagued by the Essex Gang, who poached the deer that lived in the forest. They needed a way of dispensing with their ill-gotten gains, and a local butcher would be the perfect contact. Thus, by the age of 30, Dick Turpin had fallen in with career criminals. Turpin sold the stolen meat until one day, probably in 1735, he decided to give up all pretense at honest trading and joined the Essex Gang.
Dick Turpin's exploits are often romanticised today, but there's nothing romantic about aiming a loaded pistol at an innocent traveller and ordering them to stand and deliver. We know he was a thief, a murderer, and part of a gang of robbers who beat and raped their victims. The Essex Gang weren't highwaymen. They raided farmhouses, sometimes stealing small fortunes worth hundreds of pounds, tens of thousands in today's money. If their victims didn't reveal where their valuables were hidden, the gang used torture to get what they wanted.
When the gang were finally caught, Turpin escaped and disappeared for nearly 2 years. When he re-emerged, he was a highwayman, terrorizing travellers up and down the road through Epping Forest. We've come to Epping Forest to find the place where Turpin laid low between his brazen daylight robberies.
So somewhere around here was a pub called Turpin's Cave Inn, which was purportedly built on the site of Turpin's hideout, his cave. So I want to find it, except the pub was demolished in the 1960s and built over with some pretty nice looking houses, but that means the site of the pub and therefore the site of the cave pretty obscured from history. So we'll see what we can find.
I'm the dandy highwayman that you're too scared to mention, and I spend my cash on looking fresh and grabbing your attention. Here we are with Martin dropping bars.
Traipsing through the woods, it's easy to imagine how Turpin could attack and make his escape so effectively in the early 18th century. It's perhaps unsurprising then that we spent a day struggling to find the purported location of Turpin's lair.
But on the 4th of May 1737, someone did find the cave. Turpin had been riding and robbing with the highwayman Matthew King. During an argument at a pub, King was shot dead, possibly by Turpin. Turpin went to his hideout, but a man called Thomas Morris followed him and tried to capture him. Turpin shot Morris dead on the spot.
The murder of Thomas Morris prompted the Duke of Newcastle to put a £200 reward on Dick's head. That's equivalent to twice the average British salary in 2022. It's safe to say that Dick Turpin was a very desirable catch, if only for the wrong reasons. After murdering Thomas Morris, Dick Turpin fled north, so we've travelled to the city of York to see the places where Turpin spent the final months of his life.
If you like history, you'll love York. The city's ancient buildings have been beautifully preserved, reflecting centuries of history happening here. From the ornate York Minster to the quirky shambles, which bear a striking similarity to Harry Potter's Diagon Alley.
The old streets of York are still tightly packed within the medieval city wall, so nothing is very far away. However, those old streets are also knotty and disorganised, making it easy to get turned around.
Robin's messed up.
We may want to turn around.
Robin messed up. We're lost.
We've got the key.
Here.
We want to go there. I don't know what this is. I don't know why it's telling us to go.
Despite Robin's help, we managed to find our way to York Castle, prompting a trip down memory lane.
So Robin, I remember coming here when I was 10 years old,
really?
and I sat on these steps as a schoolchild.
Oh.
And if 10-year-old me could see me now,
He'd be incredibly underwhelmed.
No. You'd be thrilled to see the man you've become. Well, here we are. This is York Castle Museum. And inside these walls are the old prison cells, one of which was occupied by Dick Turpin back in 1738 to 1739, in the months leading up to his death. So you may be wondering why this tower behind us looks like a castle and the rest of this space doesn't look much like a castle. And broadly speaking, I think there's three types of castles in the UK these days. There's castles that were built way back when, in the early medieval period after the Norman conquest, which are still standing. They're still glorious stone structures.
Right.
There's castles that were built much later on as by posh people who had lots of money to waste, and they're fake castles. And a lot of them look like townhouses more than actual castles. They've got fake crenellations and things like that. And then there's castles like this one, which is where there was a grand medieval castle standing once upon a time in the medieval period. And then that was abandoned, left to rot, and people reused the stone. And then on the site of the castle, built new buildings. And that's what we've got here, I think. And that's why these 18th century buildings are standing on the site of York Castle and are still called York Castle.
Robin, I've got one question.
Yeah.
Why are you still wearing your sunglasses?
Tradition says Dick came to York in a daring overnight ride on his loyal, coal-coloured steed, Black Bess. After galloping for 15 hours without rest, the poor horse was overwhelmed by exhaustion and died after safely delivering her master to his destination. Historians are fairly certain that though Turpin did flee to Yorkshire, the famous overnight ride never happened. The earliest account of it comes from 1808, 71 years after the fact. It was popularised by author William Harrison Ainsworth in his 1834 Gothic romance Rookwood. Dick Turpin is a supporting character in the novel, a likeable rogue. I suspect it's not very true to life. On the 5th of November 1831, British politician George Osbaldeston attempted to recreate the ride to York. Remarkably, he did it in under 9 hours, including stops. But he required 8 horses to pull it off.
Despite the evidence against it, this dramatic event might really have happened, just not to Dick Turpin. Between 1724 and 1727, Daniel Defoe published a 3-volume travel book, A Tour Through the Whole Island of Great Britain. In it, he included an account of the highwayman John Neveson. In 1676, Neveson committed a robbery at Gad's Hill near Rochester in Kent and rode to York after crossing the Thames by ferry. He covered 320 kilometres, 200 miles, in 15 hours. Once he arrived, he went to a bowls match and placed a bet with the Lord Mayor of York. When he was arrested and tried for robbery, he produced the Lord Mayor as an alibi and was found not guilty.
When Dick Turpin was finally caught by the law, he was not so lucky, but the way he met his comeuppance is certainly unusual. In the southern Yorkshire town of Brough, he posed as a gentleman horse trader called John Palmer. Horse theft was punishable by death, but that didn't stop Turpin. He frequently travelled into the county of Lincolnshire to steal horses and sell them to tradesmen he met on his journey home. One of Dick's excursions took him to the village of Heckington in South Lincolnshire. Known for its windmill, which in a country that once had 15,000 windmills is unique for still operating with its 8 sails, Heckington is also home to the crime that would lead to Dick Turpin's demise.
Back in Dick Turpin's day, these fields to the east of Heckington were the common lands, where local man Thomas Creasy would bring his mare and her foal to graze for free, and he'd leave them unattended and come back to collect them later. On the 18th of August 1738, he found they were missing. We know from enclosure maps from 1765 that Thomas Creasy claimed land right here, so this is possibly the spot where Dick Turpin came along the unattended mare and foal and stole them. When Creasy learned the animals were missing, he sent riders out for 40 miles in every direction to try to find them, but with no luck. After that, he sent adverts out to all the local market towns, which included a detailed description of the animals. And luckily for him, the mare had some distinctive markings, including a star on her forehead.
When he wasn't selling stolen horses, Turpin lived the high life with the local gentry, often going on hunting parties. One evening in October 1738, upon returning to the village after a day's hunting, Dick shot his landlord's cock in the street. When he also threatened to shoot a neighbour who witnessed this foul deed, Turpin was arrested. His possessions were also seized, including a certain foal and a mare with a star on its forehead. It didn't take long for Dick's dodgy trips to Lincolnshire to come to light, when a friend of Thomas Creasy recognised the mare and foal. Now a known horse thief, Turpin was sent to York Castle Prison.
Inside York Castle, the prison cells are still preserved, but to get to them you have to go through some amazing exhibitions recreating a late Victorian street, a trench from the First World War, and even our train journey to York. Once in the dungeon, it's as dark and foreboding as you'd imagine. Historians don't know exactly which of these dank cells held Dick Turpin, but they've narrowed it down to a few contenders. The cell with his name on it definitely could have been his final home.
In 2009, the museum commissioned this police e-fit of Dick Turpin based on a description published in the London Gazette in 1737. It read, "Richard Turpin, a butcher by trade, is a tall, fresh-coloured man, very much marked with the smallpox, about 26 years of age, about 5 feet 9 inches high, wears a blue-grey coat and a natural wig."
Turpin was brought to York Prison on the 16th of October 1738, still pretending to be John Palmer. From this miserable place, he wrote a letter to his brother-in-law, asking for help in his pending trial. February the 6th, 1739. Dear brother, I am sorry to acquaint you that I am now under confinement in York Castle for horse stealing. If I could procure an evidence from London to give me a character, that would go a great way towards my being acquitted. I had not been long in this county before my being apprehended, so that it would pass off the readier. For heaven's sake, dear brother, do not neglect me. You will know what I mean when I say, I am yours, John Palmer. But for some reason his brother-in-law, called Pomper Rivenal, refused to pay the postage on the letter, so it was kept in the local post office. There, local schoolmaster Mr. Smith saw it. He had taught Turpin to write and recognised the handwriting of his old student. Smith gave the letter to the authorities, went to York to identify Turpin, and collect the £200 reward. John Palmer was no longer on trial. Dick Turpin was.
So Robin, where are we going now? What's the plan?
We are going to Judges Court Hotel.
Off the main street and through an alleyway and into a secluded courtyard, Judges Court Hotel is easy to miss.
So, Martin, this, as the name would suggest, is where all the judges used to stay before they went over to York Castle to preside over cases from between about 1720 and 1806. And that means the judge, Sir William Chappell, who presided over Dick Turpin's case, also stayed here the night before he sentenced him to death.
I see. And how long did that take? Was it a quick process?
We're lucky we actually have the transcript of the trial. It was a very quick process. It was justice was done quickly back then.
Yes.
By this time, Turpin was so notorious that his jailer earned £100, around £17,000 today, just by selling drinks to visitors who came to look at the dandy Highwayman. Turpin refused all efforts by priests to hear him confess and absolve himself of his many sins. On the 7th of April, 1739, Turpin was taken to be hanged at the Tyburn. Today, it's a short bus ride from the city centre.
So here we are, Alex, on the Tadcaster Road leading into York at the Tyburn, which is the spot where criminals in the 18th century would have been hanged. A nice warning to anyone visiting the city. Don't get up to anything dodgy. And Dick Turpin was brought here in an open-backed cart, paraded through the streets, and he paid 5 people 10 shillings each to be professional mourners following him through the streets. And when they got here, apparently, dressed in a brand new frock, he sprang up the stepladder to the gallows and chatted with the hangman for about 30 minutes before throwing himself off.
Making a suicide, damning his soul to hell, Robin. Is it true that the executioner was also a highwayman? Is that what they had to chat about in common?
Yeah, apparently he was a former highwayman. I wonder, that's what they chatted about for half an hour.
So this is the spot, Robin, that Dick Turpin met his grisly end. We are here. We've traced him back to the very end.
And in fact, we were talking about this when we got here. There's a tree there which we don't know how old it is, but it's got a wonderful hanging branch across it, you know? I think it's perfectly suited. Yeah. And even if that wasn't the tree that they hang people from, maybe it was here when Dick Turpin was here? Yeah.
Both you, me, Martin, and Dick Turpin could be looking at the exact same tree.
It's a spooky thought, really.
Spooky thought, yeah, exactly.
From the gallows, Dick Turpin's body was brought back into town to the Blue Boar pub to be displayed to the public. The following morning, it was taken to be buried in St George's Churchyard, which is a short walk from the castle. The street signs give you a clue that you're getting close.
So tell me, guys, where are we right now?
Well, we're outside St George's Church, of course, the burial place of none other than Dick Turpin.
And his grave is in here. Lead the way.
Feels like a monumental pilgrimage, this. Feels like there's a lot of emotion in this. Like, it started how many years ago now? 2, 3 years ago?
Oh,
Yeah,
maybe
maybe
3
more.
years ago.
We were in
yeah.
Epping Forest, and now look at us.
So here we have it. John Palmer, otherwise known as Richard Turpin, the notorious highwayman and horse stealer, executed at Tyburn on April the 7th, 1739, and buried in St George's Churchyard. This was probably put up in the early 20th century, and I think that explains the tarmac underneath us. No one actually knows who put it up, when, or why, or for how much.
Do we know that Dick Turpin was on this spot, buried on this spot, this site?
No.
We don't.
So
So we know it's in St George's.
We
We
do
know
know.
it's within this churchyard, but we don't know exactly where.
all we know is that he was buried in St George's Churchyard, and in fact, reburied, because the night he was buried, at 3 a.m. in the morning, some people were seen carting his body away. Grave robbers. They took him to the house of Dr. Marmaduke Palms, a surgeon who wanted to use Dick Turpin's body for dissection, but an angry mob rose up, took Turpin's body back, and paraded it through the streets naked to rebury it somewhere in St George's Churchyard, and filled the coffin with slaked lime, presumably to stop further grave robbers from removing the body.
Difficult to carry, the second time, very heavy.
Yeah.
So we don't know 100% that he's here, but he's definitely in this area. We found him.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
say that we
We're
found
here.
him.
We found you.
Completed the pilgrimage,
Where
absolutely.
are you?
Is Dick Turpin here? Yes, he is.
Our journey to follow the trail of Dick Turpin is complete, but the story doesn't end there. Dick Turpin's spirit is one of many that is said to haunt the city of York, and we went in search of the spookiest spots in the most haunted city in Europe. But that's a topic for another video.
Everybody thinks they know the story of Dick Turpin's highway glory.
How's the cake, Martin?
What just happened?
I tripped over.
Oh no.
I'm good, I'm good.
You fell onto Dick.
It landed on Dick.
The notorious highwayman and horse stealer, executed at Tyburn.
Oh my god, this is terrible. This shot was awful. I'm so sorry. I was stumbling.